Years ago, when I read the book of Hebrews, I would get really confused because it seemed like it was so hard to understand. And of course, a couple of the most debated passages in the whole Bible are in the book of Hebrews, like Hebrews chapter 6, for example. And so a few years ago, decided I'm going to study this book and I'm going to try to understand it the best I can. And as I studied it and I got deeper into it, I came to realize that there's actually a very simple outline for the book of Hebrews. So I want to share that with you today. Over the past probably 4 or 5 years, I've been really trying to study the book, and I am just now preaching it in my church, going through the whole thing. So I thought maybe there's maybe some of you in this church, or maybe just somebody out there, and you're saying, okay, I'm confused about the book of Hebrews. I'm going to give you a very general outline just in one graphic that I think will really help you understand the book. And when you understand where you are in the book and how it's in relation to the whole message, I think it'll really help you a lot as you study this book because it's so interesting. There's so many good things in it. But before you really even get to that, you have to understand something. Why was the book written in the first place? Why was the book of Hebrews written? And the answer is very simple. The recipients of the book of Hebrews, and we're not sure who the writer was. There's all kinds of ideas, but it doesn't say. But the recipients were believers in Jesus, or they were considering belief in Jesus, but they were being tempted to go back to the law and thinking, well, maybe we can work for our salvation. There's just something captivating about it, thinking, no, maybe I can do something to get myself to God. And so the author saying, no, you guys can't do this. And here's the overall theme of the whole book. If you get this, it's Jesus is better. That's the point, okay? And that's actually the title of the whole sermon series that I'm working on with church. Jesus is better. He's better than the law. He's better than everything. Why would you leave Jesus and go back? Now, the Old Testament sacrifices were good. The whole law system, was actually very good because it was a way for the Israelites to be reconciled back to God. And they would go through the sacrifices, Yom Kippur, and things like that. And they would offer these sacrifices, and God basically wouldn't obliterate them on the scene for their sin, right? And so God gave them the law, and this was a good thing. But then Jesus came along and fulfilled the law, and it was no longer necessary for them to have it. But these people were wanting to go back to it. And it's almost like this person who marries this great woman, and they have this great relationship, and they have these kids, and then he starts coming home from work, and she's kind of ragged and tired and hadn't done her makeup that day. And he starts getting tempted with the girl at work who is always looks nice and always is nice and respectful to him. And so he leaves his wife and goes to this woman. But then he finds out that she's just as bad, maybe worse. When they have kids now, she's the ragged woman. It's like you want to get a hold of this guy and you want to say, what do you think you're doing? You have this faithful wife. She's great, but she's just trying to take care of these kids. So stay with her and stick with her. That's the better thing. Don't go running off for some floozy. That's what the writer of Hebrews is saying to the recipients. You have Jesus, and what's wrong with you? Why are you trying to leave Jesus? Because something else is being attractive to you at this time. Jesus is better. Don't you realize what you have? So that's the whole idea. Jesus is better. Don't go back to the law. Now, when you read this book, it's kind of an interesting book because it starts off in a lot of ways like a sermon. It's kind of a sermon / letter. It's teaching. You need to know this. You need to know this, and then you need to do this, and it kind of ends like a personal letter. So it's a very interesting book in that, and just the way it's laid out. But I want to show you just kind of quickly here how it's laid out, and I think this graphic might help you quite a bit. So I'm going to just go over to this graphic that I made, and we're just going to get started. I'm going to lay out to you how this is set up. First of all, we have the introduction and the closing. Okay, that's pretty simple to understand. Just a short 4-verse introduction and then the closing, which basically is chapter 13. What falls in between there, though, if you get this, the whole book is going to make a lot of sense. This is how we have, before I show you, this is how the book is set up. There are 3 major sections in Hebrews, and each of them is is a teaching and then an exhortation. Okay, he's going to teach, this is what I want you to know, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to know, this is what I want you to do, this is what I want you to know, this is what I want you to do. That is the layout of the book of Hebrews. But what are those things? And there's three teachings, and basically what he's going to say is Jesus is better than anything that has to do with the law. And this is what I want you to do about it. So let's look at the first one. Jesus is better than the angels. That's the teaching. You'll see it in Hebrews 1:5-14. Why is it such a big deal that Jesus is better than the angels? Well, it's because when Moses received the law from God on Mount Sinai, it was given via angels. Some places in the Bible talk about how the angels were involved in this thing. And the fact that Jesus came down to be a man, he did not come down to be an angel. Jesus came to save us. And Jesus, our angels are higher on the I want to say the totem pole. That's not very biblical, right? Of what is better. There's God, and angels are more powerful than us. Then there's us, but the angels weren't made in the image of God, and we were. And Jesus did not come to save the angels; he came to save us. So when he talks about angels here, you say there's something better than us, but Jesus is better than the angels. And the angels were the means by whereby God gave the law to Moses, and so we're dealing with the law here. He's saying, don't go back to the law. Don't go back to anything that has to do with the law. Jesus is better than that. And then the exhortation from that, do not neglect the message of Jesus. Okay. Jesus is better than the angels. Do not neglect the message of Jesus. We're going to just jump over here really quickly to the Bible. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 5, where it begins the teaching. Which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today have I begotten you? And it goes on like that. Why? Jesus is so much better than the angels. And then in chapter 2, verse 1, therefore, okay, he's finished the teaching. Now he's going to the exhortation. Therefore, we must give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest we drift away. For if the word spoken through angels proves steadfast, that was the law, and every transgression and disobedience received a just reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by those who heard him? So what he's saying there is, under the law, which came through the angels, if you sinned, there was a punishment. And he's saying, how much more will we who have the gospel, who have Jesus, how much more will we be held accountable if we walk away from Jesus? Okay, that's the point. Don't walk away from Jesus, Hebrews. Stay with Jesus. All right. And so we'll go back now to the second one. That's the first one. Jesus is better than the angels. This is what you do. Don't neglect the message of Jesus. The next section, the next teaching is Jesus is better than Moses. And of course, if you're familiar at all with the Old Testament, you know that the law came through Moses. God gave it via angels to Moses. So when he's going to say Jesus is better than Moses, understand that he's saying that Jesus is better than anything Moses did. Jesus is better than the law. We get over here in Hebrews, to go back to the Bible, Hebrews chapter 3. Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of the whole heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Jesus Christ, who was faithful to whom appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house. For this one has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. So they honored Moses, and they should have, because Moses was a great servant of God. But the message here is Jesus is better than Moses. Okay? He's better than Moses. He's better than the law, better than all of that. What's the exhortation now? Don't harden your hearts, because if you know about Moses, Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt. They went out there, they saw the wonderful signs that God did, parting the sea and coming down Mount Sinai, and just all these things that God did for them, and just defeating the Egyptian army. And they said, you know what? I don't think we trust him anymore. They did not have the faith in Jesus to continue on. And so he says, look, you understand Jesus is better than Moses. You got in trouble for not listening to what Moses said to you. Don't harden your hearts against Jesus. Don't walk away from it. Remember, that's the point. Jesus is better. Don't go back to the law. The law is not going to help you at this time. You need to stay with Jesus. So don't harden your hearts against Jesus. Look in verse 6 here. If I go back to the Bible, I got to get it for you. Hebrews, I'll make sure I'm in the right spot. Hebrews 3 and 6, the last part of it, B. Well, let's read verse 6. But Christ is his son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and rejoicing hope firm until the end. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, then he's going to go in and talk about, the how the people had just walked away from God and not listened to him. Verse 12 here, beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief and departing from the living God. He's saying, don't be like the people of the Old Testament, the Israelites, who they saw everything that God did, and then they walked away. You see what Jesus did for you? You see the gospel Jesus is bringing for you? Don't walk away from that, okay? This is a simple outline. Jesus is better than the angels, so don't neglect the message of Jesus. Jesus is better than Moses, so don't harden your hearts. The third teaching is Jesus is better than the high priest. And of course, the high priests were the ones who carried out the duties of the law. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. All right, says this, seeing that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Okay, so we have Jesus who is better than the high priest. The high priest had to come and they had to continuously offer the sacrifices on the altar. But Jesus only had to do it one time. He came, and because he was perfect, because he never had any sin, he took our sin on himself, and he's better than the high priest. No longer do we need Yom Kippur. No longer do we need any of these sacrifices because Jesus did it himself. So he's saying, why are you going to leave Jesus, who offered a once for all sacrifice, and go back to the law? This simply doesn't make any sense. This is foolishness. This is dumb. Don't do it. The exhortation that comes from that, be faithful. Be faithful. Hebrews 10 and 19. I will get it and then I'll show it to you. Hebrews 10:19. Therefore, brethren, because of that, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he consecrated for us through the veil that is his flesh, and having a high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast confession of our hope without wavering. What he's saying is here is, you know what? You've got Jesus and he's better than everything else. He's better than the high priest. Stay faithful to him. Don't leave him. So there you go. That is a simple outline. When you read the book of Hebrews next, look at that and say, okay, now I understand where we are, because he does a lot of quoting of the Old Testament. And sometimes you can really get bogged down a little bit, especially in some of the really difficult passages. But when you just back off from that a little bit and you look at it, he's saying Jesus is better than the angels. Jesus is better than Moses. Jesus is better than the high priest. Jesus is better than the law. Don't leave Jesus to go back to that. That would be really foolish. That would be really dumb. Okay, so there it is. If you want me to do any videos on anything in the book of Hebrews, maybe we could go through the whole book. I don't know, but you can see on our church page, which is eastlakebaptist.net. You can see our services there. You can see them on our Facebook page. You can see them on our YouTube page. If you want to see the teaching through it, but if it would be helpful to talk about some of this on YouTube, I'd like to know. Anyway, I hope that will help some of you as you study the book of Hebrews. Don't get too confused by it. It's not that hard to understand it generally, even though some of the things in it are really, really difficult. So I hope you will join with me on the next video. Whether it's about Hebrews or not, I don't know. We'll see. But thanks for coming along with me on this one. God bless.